Think you know everything about the 1939 Western that made John Wayne a star? From a desperate sheep trader's Hollywood gamble to a movie saved by a garage discovery, Stagecoach harbors secrets stranger than fiction. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Stagecoach. Fact 1. A sheep trader. With $60 created Monument Valley movies. The stunning red rock landscape of Monument Valley that we associate with classic westerns exists on screen today because of a desperate sheep trader named Harry Goulding, who took an incredible gamble during the Great Depression. In the early 1920s, Harry and his wife Leone, nicknamed Mike, had fallen in love with the dramatic sandstone formations of Monument Valley on the Utah-Arizona border, and purchased 640 acres of land for just $320 from the state of Utah. By the 1930s, Harry was running Goulding's Trading Post, a small stone building where he and Mike traded with local Navajo people, exchanging food and supplies for handcrafted rugs and jewelry. But the Great Depression hit everyone hard, including the Navajo community, and business at the remote trading post had nearly stopped completely. Harry was facing financial ruin when he heard that Hollywood director John Ford was planning to make a big-budget Western film and was looking for an authentic location to shoot it. With literally their last $60 to their name, Harry and Mike packed up their car with over 100 photographs of Monument Valley's towering mesas and dramatic rock formations. They drove all the way to Hollywood, California, where Harry somehow managed to track down John Ford through a combination of persistence and pure luck. When Ford saw Harry's stunning photographs of Monument Valley's otherworldly landscape, he immediately realized this was exactly what he needed for his new Western. Ford was so impressed that he gave the Gouldings an advance payment on the spot. And within just a few days, the entire film crew for Stagecoach had arrived in Monument Valley to begin shooting. Harry's desperate $60 gamble had worked, and his photographs of Monument Valley would forever change how Western movies looked and where they were filmed. Fact 2. John Wayne was paid less than a supporting actor. In one of Hollywood's most ironic salary arrangements, John Wayne received only $3,700 for his star-making role in Stagecoach, which was actually less money than some of the supporting actors in the same film. Claire Trevor, who played the prostitute Dallas, was the highest-paid cast member at $15,000, reflecting her status as the established star at the time. Even more surprising, Tim Holt, who played Lieutenant Blanchard in a much smaller supporting role, earned $5,000 for his work on the film, which was significantly more than Wayne's paycheck. This massive pay disparity becomes even more remarkable when you consider that Stagecoach was John Wayne's 80th film by the time he made it in 1939. Wayne had been working steadily in Hollywood for over a decade, appearing in dozens of low-budget B-westerns for Republic Studios, but he was still considered a B-movie actor who hadn't broken through to major stardom. The studios and producers saw him as someone who could handle action scenes and look good on a horse, but they didn't view him as a leading man who could carry a big-budget production. John Ford's decision to cast Wayne in the key role of the Ringo Kid was actually quite controversial at the time, since most people in the industry believed the role should go to an established A-list star like Gary Cooper. Producer Walter Wanger was so hesitant about Wayne's casting that he insisted on giving top billing to Claire Trevor instead, which is why her name appears first in the credits, even though Wayne's character drives much of the story. The small salary Wayne received for Stagecoach makes his career transformation even more dramatic, since this single film launched him into A-list stardom and made him one of the most recognizable actors in Hollywood history. By the end of 1939, Stagecoach had grossed nearly $1 million and established Wayne as a major star. Fact 3. The original film negative was lost forever. One of the most acclaimed Western films in cinema history nearly vanished completely when the original camera negative of Stagecoach was either lost or destroyed sometime after its 1939 release. The original negative is the master copy that comes directly from the camera during filming, and it's the most important element for creating high-quality prints of any movie. Without it, film studios typically struggle to produce clear, sharp copies for theaters or home video releases. For decades, movie lovers and film preservationists had to settle for poor-quality versions of Stagecoach that came from lower-generation prints, which meant the film looked grainy and lacked the crisp detail that audiences would have seen in theaters back in 1939. The situation seemed hopeless until director Peter Bogdanovich, who was known for films like The Last Picture Show, happened to visit John Wayne at his home sometime in the late 1960s. During his visit, Bogdanovich was looking around Wayne's garage when he made an incredible discovery that would save the film for future generations. Sitting there among Wayne's personal belongings was a completely unscreened positive print of Stagecoach that Wayne had somehow acquired and stored away for 30 years. This print had never been projected or shown anywhere, which meant it was in pristine condition without the scratches and damage that come from running film through projectors multiple times. When Bogdanovich realized what he had found, he convinced Wayne to allow the print to be used for restoration purposes. In 1970, Wayne generously agreed to let film preservationists use his garage treasure to create a new negative that could produce high-quality copies of the movie. This new negative became the source for most of the film festival screenings and later home video releases that allowed new generations to see Stagecoach the way it was meant to look. Fact 4. Studios wanted Gary Cooper and Marlene Dietrich. Instead, before John Wayne and Claire Trevor were cast in the roles that would define their careers, producer Walter Wanger had a completely different vision for Stagecoach that involved two of Hollywood's biggest stars at the time. Wanger wanted Gary Cooper, who was already a major leading man, known for films like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, to play the Ringo Kid, and he pushed hard for the glamorous Marlene Dietrich to take on the role of Dallas, the prostitute with a heart of gold. The casting discussions became even more complicated when other major stars were seriously considered for the lead roles. Errol Flynn, who was famous for his swashbuckling adventure films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, was also in the running to play Ringo, while the strong-willed Katharine Hepburn was considered for the female lead role of Dallas. These were all A-list actors who commanded top salaries and could guarantee box office success, which made them very appealing to nervous studio executives who weren't sure about funding a big-budget Western. John Ford, however, had a very different idea about who should star in his film, and he refused to budge from his vision even when it meant potentially losing financing for the entire project. Ford believed that John Wayne had the right combination of toughness and vulnerability needed for the Ringo Kid, and he felt that Claire Trevor could bring the perfect mix of world weariness and warmth to Dallas. The director was so committed to his casting choices that he was willing to walk away from major studio backing rather than compromise. The standoff between Ford and the money men became so intense that Ford actually withdrew the project from producer David Selznick's company when Selznick insisted on bigger names for the lead roles. Eventually, Walter Wanger agreed to finance the film with Ford's preferred cast, but only after Ford agreed to give top billing to Claire Trevor, who was better known than Wayne at the time. Fact 5. John Wayne's hat was his personal property for 20 years. The iconic cowboy hat that John Wayne wears as the Ringo Kid in Stagecoach wasn't a costume piece provided by the movie studio, but rather his own personal hat that he brought to the set and continued wearing in Western films for the next 2 decades. This particular hat became so closely associated with Wayne's screen persona that it essentially helped define the look of the classic American cowboy hero for generations of moviegoers around the world. Wayne was so attached to this hat that he made it a regular part of his wardrobe for nearly every Western he appeared in throughout the 1940s and 1950s. The hat traveled with him from one film set to another, becoming a trusted companion that appeared in some of the most famous Western movies ever made, including films directed by John Ford and Howard Hawks, who both appreciated the authentic, lived-in look that Wayne's personal hat brought to his characters. The hat's long career in Hollywood finally came to an end after Wayne finished filming Rio Bravo with director Howard Hawks in 1959. By that point, the hat had endured 20 years of constant use on movie sets, exposure to harsh outdoor filming conditions, and the wear and tear that comes from being handled by costume departments and worn during action sequences involving horseback riding, gunfights, and other physically demanding scenes. Wayne himself admitted that he had to retire the hat simply because it was falling apart after 2 decades of faithful service. The brim had become frayed and shapeless, the crown had lost its structure, and the overall condition had deteriorated to the point where it could no longer look presentable on camera. The retirement of this particular hat marked the end of an era, since it had been present during some of the most important films in Wayne's career and had helped establish the visual template for how Western heroes should look on screen. Fact 6. A shaman promised perfect cloud formations. During the filming of Stagecoach in Monument Valley, director John Ford received what could only be described as supernatural assistance from a local Navajo medicine man named Hosteen Tso, who made an extraordinary promise about controlling the weather for the movie. Ford was particularly concerned about getting the right kind of dramatic sky shots to complement the towering red rock formations of Monument Valley, since clouds and lighting were crucial elements in creating the epic, sweeping look he wanted for his Western. Hosteen So approached Ford and confidently told the director that he could provide exactly the type of cloud formations that would work best for the film's cinematography. This wasn't just a casual offer of help with weather prediction, but rather a specific promise that the right clouds would appear when Ford needed them most for his shots. Ford, who was known for being practical and no-nonsense about filmmaking, was initially skeptical about this unusual offer of meteorological assistance. However, Ford decided to take Hosteen So at his word, and the results were nothing short of remarkable. Day after day during the filming schedule, the exact type of dramatic cloud formations that Ford had envisioned for his shots appeared right on cue in the Monument Valley sky. These weren't just random clouds, but the specific puffy, dramatic formations that created perfect contrast against the red sandstone monuments and provided the kind of epic backdrop that Ford needed for his sweeping landscape shots. The clouds appeared so consistently and so perfectly timed with the filming schedule that even the practical-minded Ford began to believe that something beyond ordinary weather patterns was at work. Whether through genuine spiritual intervention, an uncanny understanding of local weather patterns, or simply remarkable coincidence, Hosteen So's promise was fulfilled throughout the production. These perfectly timed cloud formations became an integral part of Monument Valley's cinematic signature, helping to create the iconic visual style that would define Western movies for decades to come. Fact 7. The Stagecoach river crossing was impossible. One of the most challenging scenes in Stagecoach involved floating the heavy wooden stagecoach, complete with all its passengers, across a river, and the studio's technical experts initially told John Ford that the sequence simply could not be filmed safely or convincingly. The scene was crucial to the story since it showed the characters working together to overcome a major obstacle during their dangerous journey, but the logistics of actually getting a fully loaded stagecoach to float across water seemed insurmountable to the film crew. The main problem was that a real stagecoach, especially one carrying multiple passengers and their luggage, would be far too heavy to float on its own, and any attempt to force it across a river would likely result in the coach sinking and potentially putting the actors in serious danger. The studio technicians ran calculations and conducted tests, but they couldn't figure out a way to make the scene work without using obvious movie tricks that would look fake on camera. John Ford was so frustrated with the technical difficulties that he seriously considered removing the entire river crossing sequence from the script, which would have meant rewriting significant portions of the story and losing what he felt was an important character development moment. However, legendary stuntman Yakima Canutt, who was working on the film as both a performer and stunt coordinator, approached Ford with an ingenious solution that would save the scene. Canutt suggested attaching several hollowed-out logs to the underside of the stagecoach, which would provide enough buoyancy to keep the heavy vehicle afloat, while still allowing it to look like a normal stagecoach on camera. He also recommended running an underwater cable across the river that could be used to help guide and pull the floating coach from one side to the other, ensuring that it would move in a straight line and reach the opposite shore safely. Canutt's innovative plan worked perfectly, and the river crossing became one of the most memorable and technically impressive sequences in the entire film. Fact 8. Ford only did one take, creating visible mistakes. John Ford was famous throughout Hollywood for his extremely efficient directing style, which included shooting most scenes in just one take, and then moving on to the next setup without giving actors or crew members a chance to fix any problems that might have occurred during filming. This approach saved both time and money during production, but it also meant that small mistakes and technical errors sometimes made it into the final version of his movies, including several noticeable problems that can still be seen in Stagecoach today. The most obvious example of Ford's one-take policy creating a visible error occurs during John Wayne's dramatic introduction as the Ringo Kid, which is supposed to be one of the most important moments in the entire film. The camera performs a zoom shot that starts wide and then moves in for a close-up of Wayne's face. But the focus adjustment doesn't keep up with the zoom movement, leaving Wayne's face blurry and out of focus for most of the shot until it finally sharpens up near the very end. Another mistake that made it into the finished film happens during a scene where Wayne's character hands his rifle to the marshal played by George Bancroft. Before giving up his weapon, Wayne ejects a cartridge from the rifle chamber, and viewers with sharp ears can actually hear the brass cartridge case hit the wooden floor of the soundstage where the scene was being filmed. This sound effect completely breaks the illusion that the characters are outdoors in the desert, since it's clearly the sound of metal hitting a hollow wooden studio floor rather than dirt or sand. Ford's refusal to shoot multiple takes also resulted in some continuity problems, such as shadows that change direction between different camera angles and small props that appear and disappear from one shot to the next. While these errors might seem like serious problems to modern audiences who are used to perfectionist filmmaking, Ford believed that the energy and spontaneity of first takes was more important than technical perfection. Fact 9. Ward Bond lost the driver role because he couldn't handle 6 horses. John Ford's original casting plan for the Stagecoach driver Buck included his longtime friend and frequent collaborator Ward Bond, who had appeared in many of Ford's previous films and seemed like a natural choice for the role of the gruff but lovable driver who guides the passengers through dangerous Apache territory. Bond was a reliable character actor who had worked with Ford since the silent film era, and the director trusted him to bring the right combination of toughness and humor to the part. However, Ford discovered a major problem with his casting choice when it came time to actually film the scenes that required Buck to drive the stagecoach. The role demanded that the actor be able to handle what's called a 6-up stagecoach, which means controlling 6 horses that are hitched together in pairs and requires considerable skill and experience to manage safely. Bond had never learned how to drive a team of 6 horses, and the complex reins and coordination required to control that many animals at once was far beyond his abilities. Ford faced a dilemma because the production schedule was too tight to allow time for Bond to receive proper training in stagecoach driving, and using a stunt double for all the driving scenes would have created continuity problems and limited the camera angles that Ford could use. The director reluctantly decided that he needed to recast the role with an actor who already possessed the necessary driving skills, even though this meant disappointing his old friend Ward Bond. Andy Devine, who had experience with horses and stagecoach driving from his work in other Western films, was brought in to replace Bond as Buck the driver. When Ford expressed his frustration about having to make this casting change and questioned why he was stuck with Devine instead of his preferred choice, Devine delivered a perfectly blunt response that ended the discussion. He simply told Ford, "Because Ward Bond can't drive 6 horses," which was an undeniable fact that settled the matter once and for all. Fact 10. There was no paved road to Monument Valley in 1939. When John Ford decided to film Stagecoach in Monument Valley, he was choosing one of the most remote and inaccessible locations in the American Southwest, since there were no paved roads leading to or through the area in 1939. This lack of proper transportation infrastructure was actually the main reason why Monument Valley had never been used as a movie location before, despite its spectacular scenery that would have been perfect for Western films. The absence of paved roads meant that Ford and his entire film crew had to make a difficult and potentially dangerous journey across rough desert terrain just to reach the filming location. All of their equipment, including heavy cameras, lighting gear, costumes, and supplies for the cast and crew, had to be transported over dirt tracks and rocky paths that were barely suitable for regular automobiles, let alone the trucks needed to carry movie-making equipment. The crew members were housed in an old Civilian Conservation Corps camp near Kayenta in northeastern Arizona, which was about 25 miles away from the main filming locations near Goulding's trading post on the Utah border. Even this relatively short distance required careful planning and coordination, since the unpaved roads could become impassable during bad weather, and getting stuck in the desert with expensive equipment and a large cast and crew would have been a serious problem. The challenging conditions at the 5,700-foot elevation included constant strong winds and low temperatures that made filming difficult, but Ford was determined to capture the dramatic landscape that no other movie had ever shown before. The lack of paved access roads actually worked in Ford's favor artistically, since it meant that Monument Valley retained its wild, untouched appearance without any signs of modern civilization visible in the background of his shots. The first paved road through Monument Valley wasn't completed until the 1950s, more than a decade after Stagecoach introduced the location to moviegoers around the world and established it as the classic setting for Western films. Fact 11. Orson Welles watched it 40 times to make Citizen Kane. One of the most remarkable tributes to the filmmaking excellence of Stagecoach comes from Orson Welles, who would go on to create what many critics consider the greatest American film ever made with Citizen Kane in 1941. According to Simon Callow's biography of Welles, The future director of Citizen Kane watched Stagecoach an incredible 40 times during his preparation for making his own debut film, treating Ford's Western as a masterclass in movie-making technique. Wells wasn't just casually enjoying Stagecoach as entertainment during these repeated viewings, but rather studying it with the intensity of a film student, trying to learn every aspect of professional filmmaking from one of Hollywood's most accomplished directors. He paid close attention to Ford's camera movements, editing choices, character development, and the way Ford structured scenes to build dramatic tension throughout the story. What made Wells's obsessive study of Stagecoach even more significant was that he publicly declared the film to be a perfect textbook example of how movies should be made, which was high praise coming from someone who was already being recognized as a brilliant innovator in radio and theater. Wells understood that Ford had created something special with Stagecoach, combining technical excellence with compelling storytelling in a way that made the film work on multiple levels for different types of audiences. The influence of Ford's techniques can be seen throughout Citizen Kane, particularly in the way Wells uses deep focus photography and carefully planned camera movements to tell his story visually. While Citizen Kane and Stagecoach are completely different types of films with different themes and settings, Wells clearly learned valuable lessons about pacing, character development, and visual storytelling from his intensive study of Ford's Western masterpiece. The fact that Wells chose to watch Stagecoach 40 times rather than studying a variety of different films shows just how much he respected Ford's craftsmanship and believed that this single film contained all the essential elements of great movie-making. Fact 12. Ford was deliberately cruel to John Wayne on set. John Ford's treatment of John Wayne during the filming of Stagecoach was so harsh and publicly humiliating that it shocked other cast and crew members, with Ford regularly calling Wayne insulting names like Big Oaf and Dumb Bastard in front of everyone on the set. Ford's abuse wasn't limited to name-calling, but extended to constant criticism of every aspect of Wayne's performance, including the way he delivered his lines, how he walked across the set, and even small details like how he washed his face during scenes. The most dramatic example of Ford's cruel behavior occurred when he physically grabbed Wayne by the chin and shook him while delivering what became one of the most famous pieces of acting advice in Hollywood history. Ford told Wayne, "Why are you moving your mouth so much? Don't you know you don't act with your mouth in pictures? You act with your eyes?" This incident was witnessed by Claire Trevor and other cast members, who were stunned by Ford's aggressive approach to directing his leading man. Ford's treatment of Wayne was particularly puzzling because he had specifically fought to cast Wayne in the role against the wishes of studio executives and producers, which meant he believed in Wayne's abilities even while he was publicly tearing him down. Other actors on the set, including Andy Devine and Thomas Mitchell, also received harsh treatment from Ford, but none of them endured the sustained campaign of criticism that Wayne faced throughout the production. Despite the psychological abuse, Wayne tolerated Ford's brutal methods and never fought back or walked off the set, apparently understanding that Ford was trying to push him to deliver a better performance. The strategy worked, since Wayne's portrayal of the Ringo Kid became the role that transformed him from a B-movie actor into a major Hollywood star. Ford later admitted that at least part of his harsh treatment was deliberately designed to provoke Wayne into giving a stronger, more emotionally authentic performance. Fact 13. The film's geography is completely wrong. One of the most significant geographical errors in Stagecoach is that the entire film takes place in the wrong type of landscape for the story that's being told, with Monument Valley's distinctive red sandstone formations standing in for a completely different desert environment hundreds of miles away. The story is supposed to take place during a stagecoach journey from Tonto, Arizona to Lordsburg, New Mexico, which would have crossed through the Chihuahuan Desert of southwestern New Mexico, a landscape characterized by low scrub vegetation, scattered mountains, and very different geological formations. Monument Valley, where Ford chose to film the movie, is located on the Colorado Plateau in the Four Corners region where Utah and Arizona meet, and it features towering sandstone buttes and mesas that are completely unlike anything that would be found along the actual stagecoach route between Arizona and New Mexico. The vegetation is also completely wrong, since Monument Valley has high desert plants and terrain that don't match the lower elevation desert environment where the story is supposed to be taking place. Even more problematic from a historical accuracy standpoint is the fact that Monument Valley sits on the Navajo Reservation and is nowhere near the traditional territory of the Apache people who are supposed to be threatening the stagecoach passengers throughout the film. The real Geronimo and his Apache warriors operated primarily in southern Arizona and northern Mexico, which is hundreds of miles away from Monument Valley, and involves completely different tribal territories and geographical regions. Ford made these geographical compromises because he was more interested in creating visually stunning cinematography than in maintaining historical or geographical accuracy, and Monument Valley's dramatic landscape provided the epic backdrop he wanted for his Western. The film also blends shots from Monument Valley, with scenes filmed at the Iverson Movie Ranch in California and other locations, creating even more geographical inconsistencies that are visible to viewers who pay attention to the changing landscape and rock formations between different scenes. Fact 14. Yakima Canutt's death. Defying stunt was shot only once. The most dangerous and spectacular stunt in Stagecoach involved legendary stuntman Yakima Canutt performing a sequence where he falls from his horse, gets dragged between the legs of the Stagecoach team, and then has the entire stagecoach with 6 horses pass completely over his body while traveling at full speed. This incredibly risky stunt was so dangerous that Canutt knew there would be only one chance to get it right, since any mistake could result in serious injury or death from being trampled by horses or crushed by the heavy wooden stagecoach. The moment Canutt completed the stunt and rolled clear of the horses and wheels, he immediately jumped to his feet and ran directly to John Ford to make sure that the cameras had captured the entire sequence successfully. Canutt was understandably anxious about whether the stunt had been filmed properly, since he had just risked his life performing something that would be nearly impossible to repeat safely. Ford's response to Canutt's urgent question about whether they had gotten the shot on film became one of the most famous quotes in stunt history. The director told Canutt that even if the cameras had somehow failed to record the stunt properly, "I'll never shoot that again," which was Ford's way of acknowledging just how incredibly dangerous and unrepeatable the sequence had been to perform. The stunt was filmed at Lucerne Dry Lake in the Mojave Desert, rather than in Monument Valley, and the footage was later combined with other shots to create the seamless chase sequence that appears in the finished film. Canutt later explained his technique for surviving the stunt, saying that the horses had to be running fast so they would run straight, and that he had to keep his arms crossed over his chest and stomach to avoid having them torn off by the stagecoach's front axle as it passed over him. Fact 15. The film accidentally launched Monument Valley tourism. Harry Goulding never intended to become a tourism pioneer when he convinced John Ford to film Stagecoach in Monument Valley, but his efforts to accommodate the Hollywood film crew ended up accidentally creating one of the most famous tourist destinations in the American West. When Ford and his team arrived to begin filming, Goulding quickly realized that he needed to provide much more than just a remote location for the movie. Since the cast and crew required lodging, meals, and various services during their extended stay in the isolated desert region, Goulding took on multiple roles during the production, serving as the local host who provided accommodations for the actors and crew members, organized guided tours of the area so that Ford could scout different filming locations, and helped locate Navajo people from the local community who could work as extras in the movie. His trading post became the unofficial headquarters for the entire film production, and Goulding found himself managing logistics that went far beyond his original experience as a sheep trader and store owner. Recognizing the potential for future business opportunities after seeing how impressed the Hollywood visitors were with Monument Valley's spectacular scenery, Goulding decided to build a proper motel at the base of an 800-foot-tall cliff near his trading post. This facility was designed to accommodate travelers who might want to visit Monument Valley after seeing it featured in movies, and it represented Goulding's first serious investment in what would eventually become a thriving tourism industry. After Stagecoach was released and became a huge success, Monument Valley began attracting not just more film productions but also regular tourists who wanted to see the dramatic landscape for themselves. Goulding's motel and trading post became the foundation for a tourism infrastructure that would eventually include guided tours, visitor centers, and other services that continue to bring hundreds of thousands of people to Monument Valley every year, making it one of the most photographed and visited locations in the entire American Southwest.